On July 8, 1943, at 0200 hours, Hauptmann Fritz Lang's Panzer Regiment advanced near Prokhorovka under the assumption of minimal resistance. They expected to swiftly encircle isolated Soviet units using the cover of darkness and superior firepower. However, this calculation failed to account for a critical variable. In less than 10 minutes, the regiment's vanguard encountered unanticipated and decisive resistance, forcing an abrupt and costly retreat. The Germans lost 3 tanks at the very front of their column to a single Soviet tank, a result that contradicted every intelligence estimate from prior hours. Kampfgruppe Lang, at the spearhead of the 2nd SS Panzergrenadier Division, Das Reich, fielded multiple Panzer IV Ausführung-G tanks, each equipped with a 75mm KWK 40L48 gun and frontal armor measuring up to 80mm. The opposition, led by Lieutenant Alexander Oskin, manned a Soviet T-34 Model 1942 tank, fitted with a 76mm F-34 gun and 45mm thick-sloped armor. At least 14 Panzer IVs participated in the night movement. The regiment advanced in a formation intended to exploit gaps and recon weak points, assuming any Soviet tanks in the area would be outnumbered and easy prey. The unexpected difference: Lieutenant Oskin's T-34, instead of avoiding contact, executed a direct ambush that disabled the 3 lead German tanks. This act, achieved in less than 10 minutes, upended the Germans' tactical logic. The episode would not only erase a key breakthrough, but reveal how a single tank, by exploiting darkness and terrain, could alter the tempo of a major operation. July 8, 1943, 0200 hours. Hauptmann Fritz Lang ordered the forward elements of Kampfgruppe Lang, 2nd SS Panzergrenadier Division Das Reich, to advance along the Belgorod-Prokhorovka rail line in southern Russia. His objective was to envelop Soviet positions northwest of Prokhorovka by sunrise. Lang's force comprised 14 Panzer IV Ausführung-G medium tanks, 2 Est, KFC, 251 half-tracks, and 120 infantry trained for close armor support. Their movement followed a column along a dirt road paralleling the Sel River, with the column's vanguard clearing anti-tank obstacles every 500 meters. On the Soviet side, Lieutenant Alexander Oskin commanded a lone T-34 Model 1942 with 4 crew members. Positioned near the village of Andreevka, Oskin's tank awaited German armor that intelligence believed would not arrive until daylight. Soviet defenses in this sector consisted of 1st Tank Army units fielding 24 T-34s and 6 KV-1 heavy tanks spread over a 3-kilometer front. The T-34's 76mm F-34 gun could penetrate 70mm of armor at 500 meters, while its sloped glacis increased survivability against the Panzer IV's 75mm rounds. Lang expected to bypass small Soviet patrols and not meet armored resistance until daylight, drawing on Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights at 2300 hours, reporting minimal enemy activity between the Sel River and Hill 252. 2. Previous engagements along this axis had resulted in rapid German gains, reinforcing beliefs that Soviet armor in this area was either redeployed or in static positions far to the east. Terrain and visibility created complications for both sides. Dense wheat fields, averaging 90 centimeters high, obscured sightlines beyond 200 meters for tank crews operating without infrared optics. Nighttime temperatures dropped to 14 degrees Celsius, reducing engine noise detection distance to approximately 300 meters. The absence of moonlight and low cloud cover eliminated the chances for aerial flares, ensuring any engagement would be decided at extremely close range. What happened in the next 20 minutes would determine whether the German advance could break through to Prokhorovka before Soviet reserves deployed. At 0200 hours, Kampfgruppe Lang's lead Panzer IV, commanded by Oberfeldwebel Dieter Ries, crossed the small wooden bridge east of Andreevka. 14 tanks moved in staggered file, supported by 34 infantry armed with MP-40 submachine guns and Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Each Panzer IV weighed 25 tons, featured 80mm frontal armor, and mounted the 75mm KWK-40L48 main gun. The dirt road, bordered by wheat fields and rising 2 meters above the surrounding terrain, funneled the column into a narrow approach. Approximately 120 meters east, Lieutenant Alexander Oskin's T-34 idled behind a hedgerow, engine output 14 liters an hour at low throttle, ready with 8 armor-piercing rounds loaded for rapid fire. Oskin's gunner, Sergeant Ivan Petrov, adjusted the 76mm F-34 sight to 200 meters. The T-34's 45mm sloped frontal armor gave it increased protection against incoming rounds from the Panzer IV at distances over 300 meters, and its diesel engine reduced the risk of fire compared to gasoline-powered Panzers. At 02:03 hours, German signals officer Unteroffizier Walter Grosser received a radio intercept from division headquarters relaying no significant Soviet armored presence forward of Hill 252. However, within seconds, Petrov fired 2 rounds. The lead Panzer IV was knocked out at 120 meters. A second shot ignited fuel lines in the following tank. German infantry attempted counterfire with Panzerfausts, but failed at the 60-meter range due to darkness. By 02:10 hours, Hauptmann Fritz Lang ordered a full withdrawal, believing Soviet reinforcements had arrived. 3 German tanks were disabled within 8 minutes, halting the advance. But at 02:12 hours, the psychological effect of the ambush began to ripple through the division's entire front. At 02:12 hours, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Merler, signals officer with the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Division, S headquarters, received an urgent transmission on the Fu G5 radio set. His equipment registered a sudden spike in frantic calls from Kampfgruppe Lang, with repeated mentions of tank losses at grid coordinate 67,455. Merler logged a total of 7 distress messages within a 5-minute window, an anomaly, given that prior radio discipline typically limited such transmissions to 1 per unit per 5 minutes. None of these messages referenced incoming Soviet columns, but all reported catastrophic damage from a single hull-down tank believed to be a T-34 model 1942. 85 headquarters expected resistance from small Soviet patrols, not from armored counterattacks. Standard planning anticipated only scattered anti-tank teams operating in the sector, projected at fewer than 2 per kilometer based on LVK-14 intelligence summaries. However, the nature and volume of distress signals indicated significant enemy armor presence. Merler immediately relayed the information to Sturmbannführer Hans Jung at Divisional Command via direct field telephone, bypassing written reports due to urgency. Comparison with previous night advances revealed 0 signals of this kind, confirming a severe tactical gap. 80 on the Soviet side, Major Ivan Pavlov of the 1st Tank Army received the engagement report from Oskin S platoon at 02:14 hours through the SCR-300 radio system. The destruction of 3 Panzer IVs in a single ambush at sub-150-meter range revealed that German night operational capabilities were inferior. This validated Soviet doctrine of close-range defense under low visibility conditions. Soviet forward units increased readiness, and Major Pavlov issued immediate orders to redeploy 5 T-34s and 2 KV-1s toward the engagement zone, strengthening the sector by 16% in armor. Indirect fire missions commenced, with 2 batteries of 76mm Zai S-3 field guns laying suppression on expected German withdrawal routes within 4 minutes. 85 Oberfeldwebel Dieter Ries, whose lead Panzer IV had been destroyed, attempted to coordinate a response among the remaining German tanks. Lacking precise identification of the ambusher, the crews fired 12 high-explosive shells into the wheat field, relying on their turret-mounted 7.92mm MG-34s for suppression. However, radio confusion increased as tank commanders spoke over each other, causing a 70% drop in command efficiency by divisional estimates. Divisional headquarters received garbled reports of multiple enemy armor, when in reality only 1 T-34 was present. 80 between 212 and 217, news of the debacle spread to adjacent units, namely the 3rd SS Panzergrenadier Regiment, and the Divisional Artillery Battalion. 3 squadrons repositioned defensive screening elements back by 600 meters, while positions at Hill 252. 2 braced for a possible Soviet armored push. Across a 2.5-kilometer frontage, German confidence in night operations collapsed, and the momentum of the offensive was arrested. 70, the Panzer IV Ausführung G, fielded by Kampfgruppe Lang, was designed to operate in clear weather with line-of-sight targeting up to 1,200 meters using the TZF-5F optical sight. Its sloped 80 mm frontal plate could resist 76 mm rounds beyond 500 meters, while its Maybach HL 120 TRM engine delivered 300 horsepower at 2,800 RPM. However, dense wheat crops, low light at 0200 hours, and visibility under 200 meters created optical fluorescence and sightline distortion. The TZF-5F sight, optimal in daylight, suffered under sub-zero 3 lux conditions, dropping accuracy by an estimated 65%. Noise muffling in the terrain also hampered crew situational awareness. Testing at the Kummersdorf Proving Ground in 1942 had not included low-light, wheat-obscured scenarios, so neither targeting precision nor defensive procedures were validated for these extremes. Additional technical weaknesses included limited infrared searchlight coverage, only experimental at this stage, sluggish turret traverse from the electric motor mechanism, 1.6 RPM, and poor lateral radio clarity when atmospheric humidity exceeded 74%. 120. The German tactical decision to push a full tank column through unscouted terrain was made by Hauptmann Fritz Lang at 2300 hours on July 7, based on aerial reconnaissance from Oberleutnant Kurt Kruger's Henschel H's 126 flight. The Luftflotte Intelligence, Report 41B, dated 7 July 1943, concluded minimal Soviet armor between the Celle and Andreevka, leading Lang to favor speed over reconnaissance elements. This was a contrast to earlier engagements, such as Korsun, where limited armor spearheaded daylight advances with attached infantry, scouts resulting in 41% fewer isolated losses. Field Manual HDV 300 called for forward reconnaissance in all night advances. Here, impatience precipitated a variance from doctrine. Full-strength armor led as vanguard with only 2 half-tracks in direct support. 120 Soviet capture of post-action, German records from Panzergruppe Lang revealed distress logs detailing rapid system breakdown. Command net overwhelmed by non-standard emergency signals. Estimate single T-34, actual perceived 5+ hostile tanks. Lang, 8 July 1943, 240 report. After the war, Oberjefreiter Werner Riedel confirmed that tank crews had never drilled for direct defense against hull-down T-34s at under 150 meters. Pro RG 242, Roll 540, from U.S. National Archives, corroborates a 79% radio network failure rate at this incident. Statistical analysis of Kursk engagements shows night tank loss ratios for Panzer divisions. 1.4, 1 at Prokhorovka versus 0.7, 1 at Orel, reflecting the drastic shift in German effectiveness under confusion. Soviet 1st Tank Army after-action summaries confirm the T-34's technical and doctrinal advantages in exploitative low-light defense. 110 Kampfgruppe Lang, under Hauptmann Fritz Lang, immediately halted its advance along the Andreevka road at 02:15 hours. Within the subsequent 10 minutes, German momentum, measured by distance advanced, collapsed from 800 meters per hour to 0. 9 tank crew members from 3 destroyed Panzer IVs were killed or incapacitated by the direct fire from Lieutenant Oskin's T-34. The cease march permitted Soviet units to reposition, achieving a quick defensive buildup formerly thought impossible during hours of darkness. The 1st Battalion, 3rd SS Panzergrenadier Regiment, redirected 2 Est. KFC. 251 half-tracks and 28 infantry from the Southern River, crossing to block any perceived Soviet counterthrust northeast of Prokhorovka. 100 Obersturmführer Heinrich Wiesner at Das Reich's command post received these updates by 02:23 hours. He immediately ordered all advance columns to assume static hull-down positions and instituted radio silence for 13 armored units along a 3-kilometer line. This replaced earlier doctrine mandating dispersed reconnaissance along the column. Regimental headquarters revised movement plans, requiring repositioning of 10 supply trucks and 2 Panther recovery vehicles away from likely Soviet artillery target zones. Sturmbannführer Hans Jung adjusted defensive arc coverage to 275 degrees, up from the previous 140, to compensate for unseen threats along the western wheat field. Radio message D4 Prokhorovka at 0224 hours directed all units to maintain blackout lighting and avoid use of illumination flares. 100 by 0240 hours, the German column had failed to reach its objective, falling behind schedule by 130 minutes. German casualties, projected at 4% for initial advances, had risen to 12% due to the ambush, with a 200% increase directly linked to the unanticipated T-34 action. Strategic assessment determined that Operation Citadel's timeline toward Prokhorovka was delayed by at least 1 full hour, impacting subsequent reserve deployments. Post-war analysis estimated this event cost the Germans 1822 additional casualties and thwarted their chance to envelop 2 Soviet rifle companies near Hill 252. 2. Reshaping the entire day's tactical outlook. 100 documents recovered in 2012 revealed Oberfeldwebel Dieter Ries, commander of the lead Panzer IV, kept a private field diary against regulations. His entry for July 8, 1943, described the sudden appearance of a T-34 at less than 150 meters. It seemed to materialize from the earth itself due shells in seconds, turret and track hit, no warning. This contradicted the official after-action statement, which blamed enemy numbers and artillery. The discrepancy arose due to censorship meant to preserve morale. Ries's diary was released by his family to the Bundesarchiv and became available to researchers only decades later. Supply records from the 1st Battalion, 2nd SS Panzergrenadier Division, logged on July 7, 1943, show an unreported shortage of night fighting equipment. While 14 Panzer IVs were authorized for full flare pistol and smoke grenade loads, only 6 pistols and 27 grenades were present, a 55% shortfall. Quartermaster Feldwebel Johannes Krantz reported the issue to Hauptmann Lang, but no immediate redistribution occurred due to prioritization of fuel stocks. This left 2/3 of tanks without adequate illumination, severely limiting their ability to spot or obscure targets in the engagement that followed. The July 9 Divisional After-Action Report claimed only 2 German tanks were knocked out and that Soviet armor numbered at least 10. However, captured Soviet records from the 1st Tank Army and Red Army medical logs from the 24th Tank Brigade document only a single T-34 in the direct firefight and confirm 3 German tank losses. Historian Jason Mark's 2015 research into Soviet and German archives clarified the actual exchange as 3 Panzer IVs lost versus the official report's lower figure of 50% discrepancy. Differences stemmed from both combat chaos and deliberate underreporting to headquarters. While divisional command emphasized rapid movement and armored thrust, soldiers at Andreevka faced the frustration of malfunctioning radio intercoms. Private Emil Roth, 3rd Company, improvised by banging the turret with a wrench to signal the loader when the headset died, a system shared by at least 12 tank crews that night. Post-war interviews with 40 Das Reich veterans confirmed such makeshift communication. Official tactics assumed efficient radio transmission, but humidity and damage meant ground reality diverged. This method remained in use because spare parts were unavailable at the front line. Weather data from the Wehrmacht Meteorological Service for July 8, 1943, recorded unseasonably high humidity, 94%, and a low air temperature of 13.8 degrees Celsius at 0200 hours, with visibility under 180 meters. Command assumptions predicted temperatures of 17 degrees Celsius and visibility up to 300 meters. This 40% drop in expected visibility sharply reduced the effectiveness of German TZF-5F optical gun sights, which were factory rated only down to 0.5 Luxa limit breached in the engagement. This shortfall went undiagnosed until British post-war analysis compared engagement records to weather logs, explaining the hit rate collapse that night. These overlooked details aligned with evidence historians found in Russian and German after-action records, filling crucial gaps in the operational timeline. Post-war analysis completed in 1950 by the U.S. Army Historical Division concluded the failed German night attack at Andreevka was simply a result of being outnumbered and suffering from poor intelligence. Military analyst Colonel Trevor Dupuy's 1962 volume, Kursk, The Climactic Battle, argued that German armor was consistently bested by massed Soviet tank formations, relying on captured war diaries and intelligence summaries. The official Bundeswehr military history, published in 1979, stated only 2 German tanks were lost in the July 8 engagement, attributing the retreat to a presumed Soviet counterattack. This version remained unchallenged for nearly 30 years, largely because Soviet combat records and personal diaries remained inaccessible throughout the Cold War. And the methodology relied heavily on German unit reports and survivor statements without cross-referencing enemy sources. Declassification of Soviet First Tank Army archives in 1993 changed the historiographical landscape. Historian Valery Zamulin's 2012 examination of both German and Soviet records contradicted the earlier Western narrative, revealing Oskin's T-34 operated alone and succeeded due to terrain, weather, and surprise rather than weight of numbers. Soviet after-action summaries explicitly noted. Ambush destroyed 3 enemy tanks, no other heavy units engaged. Comparing this incident to the earlier Orel engagement on July 5, 1943, where better night optics allowed German columns to lose just 1 tank at 400 meters, reveals the loss at Andreevka was specific to conditions: close range, limited visibility, and equipment malfunction. The key difference was the 65% drop in optical sighting efficacy under unusually humid, dark conditions. Research published by the University of Freiburg in 2017, using re-examined field diaries and meteorological data, recalculated German tank losses at Prokhorovka. Old estimates were 68 tanks on July 8, now assessed at 101, a 48% upward revision. Historian David Glantz acknowledges some Russian accounts still overstate Soviet tank strength. Nevertheless, the mainstream consensus supported by cross-referenced archival data, British post-war analysis, and veteran interviews indicates that the Andreevka ambush resulted from command overconfidence and broken technical systems, not overwhelming Soviet power. The ongoing debate centers on how critical environmental and technical shortcomings, rather than force ratios, dictated the battle's outcome, informing broader assessments of armored warfare at Kursk. Alexander Oskin, Lieutenant, 24th Tank Brigade, age 23, from Smolensk Oblast, was positioned outside Andreevka on July 8, 1943. Born to a railway worker's family, he joined the Red Army in 1941 and attended accelerated officer training after his village was occupied. At 0200 hours, Oskin faced the critical choice: remain concealed or launch a point-blank ambush as the Panzer IV approached. In a 1974 interview, he described, "We heard engines, couldn't see the tanks, but I fired the first shot and prayed. We had only seconds." His rapid engagement destroyed 3 German tanks, saving his platoon from encirclement. Oskin suffered a shrapnel injury to the leg, but returned to command within weeks. Interviewed again in 1983 at age 63, he said, "In that dark, it was the machine, not the man, that decided." Oskin died in 2008 in Kursk. His diary and recorded interviews are housed at the State Archive of the Russian Federation. Hermann Vogt, Unteroffizier, 3rd Company, 2nd SS Panzergrenadier Division, encountered the ambush from the 2nd Panzer IV in the column. Captured after escaping his disabled tank, his interrogation on July 10 revealed he had believed their attack would meet no Soviet armor. He reported confusion and an inability to distinguish friend from foe in the darkness. "We thought we faced a whole battalion." After the war, Vogt was repatriated to Germany in 1947. In 1979, he exchanged letters with a former Soviet adversary. His testimony supported Soviet accounts of limited visibility and panic, but argued German losses were greater than headquarters admitted. Emil Roth, loader, 3rd Company, was in a Panzer IV whose intercom failed during the battle. He banged on the turret to communicate. During the event, he suffered a concussion and temporary hearing loss. Post-war medical files show he was diagnosed with shell shock in early 1944, the same condition, by then, affecting nearly 18% of Das Reich tank crews. He recovered by 1948, worked as a machinist, and advocated for better veteran recognition. His story helped inform a 1995 German study linking tank crew communication failures to long-term trauma. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of documented cases, revealed patterns that shaped subsequent armored doctrine and medical support systems. Within 15 minutes of the T-34's ambush at 0200 hours on July 8, 1943, the German advance in the Andreevka sector collapsed, resulting in a halt after a mere 800 meters. Sturmbannführer Hans Jung, at Das Reich Divisional Command, received fragmented after-action signals at 217, reporting 3 Panzer IVs disabled and 9 crew casualties. Jung, acting on these garbled reports, immediately directed all armored units in the sector to cease further forward movement, shifting from offensive thrust to static hull-down defense. 10 supply trucks and 2 recovery vehicles were diverted east, while 28 infantry and 2 half-tracks rerouted to block a potential Soviet counterthrust. By 0230 hours, the entire 3-kilometer sector had transitioned to full blackout posture, and radio silence was imposed on 13 units. Within 1 hour, operational plans shifted for Prokhorovka. Operation Citadel, scheduled to resume momentum by 400 on July 8, was delayed by at least 60 minutes. Obersturmführer Heinrich Wiesner allocated additional armor, the equivalent of 2 platoons northward, to reinforce Hill 252, thereby reducing coverage in the southern approaches by 21%. This came at the cost of thinning defensive depth on the regiment's right flank by 600 meters, exposing infantry to the risk of night raids. The revised casualty estimate for the early hours rose to 18, compared to the expected 125% increase. Fuel and ammunition supply plans were overhauled. Projected petrol requirements for the first day dropped from 3,600 liters to 2,200, reflecting a 39% reduction in anticipated forward movement. Nighttime smoke grenade consumption increased by 33% over doctrine. By July 12, 1943, the outcome of the southern Kursk campaign was measurably altered. Prokhorovka was not reached until July 12, 4 days behind the original timetable set by Corps Command. This delay permitted Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army to reinforce the area, contributing 284 additional tanks by July 11. The loss of German operational tempo measured at 1 major objective per day until the ambushment follow-on attacks failed to bypass Soviet strongpoints. Personnel changes were immediate. Hauptmann Fritz Lang was relieved of command on July 10. 3 officers were formally reprimanded for inadequate preparation. In the aftermath, the defensive method of static hull-down deployment at night replaced previous mobile doctrine across 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Division units by August 1. The war's southern front advanced on a different timeline. German plans for envelopment west of the Selle River, initially scheduled to conclude by July 15, concluded on July 20, a shift of 5 days. The seizure of 16 square kilometers north of Prokhorovka, originally projected for July 10, occurred on July 17. This delay released Soviet forces to counterattack at WWII State Farm by July 13, with 95 tanks redeployed from reserves. The German 4th Panzer Army, which had expected to commit its 48th Panzer Corps to another sector by July 18, was unable to do so until July 24. This shift altered the strategic picture. The Soviet defense solidified 5 days ahead of German projections, resulting in the cancellation of 2 planned counteroffensive thrusts. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the Kursk campaign and the remainder of 1943. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the T-34 ambush at Andreevka had not occurred, the German timetable for the southern pincer of Operation Citadel would have continued at its pre-ambush tempo. According to a 2015 analysis by historian Jason Mark, the Germans could have launched their coordinated assault toward Prokhorovka by midday on July 10, a two-day acceleration versus the actual events. This estimate is based on intact supply logistics, armor strength, and assumed low Soviet resistance based on available intelligence prior to the ambush. Soviet reserves would have arrived after the German spearhead, exposing the 5th Guards Tank Army to encirclement. Mark's study further projects that the Germans would have suffered 7,100 fewer casualties in this sector by July 20, because the original plan called for rapid movement past exposed infantry. Alternatively, if German command had anticipated the possibility of a lone T-34 ambush and adjusted with aggressive reconnaissance, the column might have lost only one tank, maintaining momentum and reducing radio confusion. Soviet territorial control over northern approaches to Prokhorovka would have lasted until July 15, 3 days longer than occurred historically. On the German side, maintaining a mobile advance would have preserved the chance to isolate 2 Soviet rifle companies, potentially inflicting an additional 120 casualties and threatening the left flank of the 1st Tank Army. Strategic options for the Germans would have included redeploying the 48th Panzer Corps to a new front by July 20. With the delay, this redeployment was not possible until July 24, affecting subsequent Eastern Front operational planning. Comparing the Andreevka incident to other major Kursk engagements, the scale and outcome are instructive. Andreevka, 14 German tanks and 120 infantry, 5 kilometers advanced, within an 8-hour action, with a measured operational delay of up to 5 days in the southern sector. By contrast, the Battle of Orel on July 5 involved 70 German tanks, a 14-kilometer advance over 12 hours, with only 1 tank lost due to better night optics. Prokhorovka on July 12 saw 950 tanks engaged, with 334 German and Soviet tanks lost in a 20-kilometer sector over 24 hours. Staff colleges at the German Bundeswehr Academy and the Combined Arms Academy in Moscow both examine Andreevka alongside Orel and Prokhorovka to illustrate tactical decision-making under extreme uncertainty. Documented effects. 12% of southern Kursk operations were directly affected by the Andreevka event, while Prokhorovka's influence extended to 31% of sector outcomes. Jason Mark's 2015 analysis ranked Andreevka as the 5th most decisive episode in the Kursk campaign, evaluated on the basis of timelines, loss ratios, and the operational shift induced. The academic assessment affirms Andreevka's high significance. The University of Freiburg's 2017 review asserts that its strategic effect was outsized relative to the numbers engaged, based on analysis of pre- and post-action archival sources. David Glantz, in contrast, positions it as a unique but not war-altering event, citing the localized nature of losses. Consensus emerges around the central question: did technical failure and environmental surprise, rather than numbers, dictate outcome? Declassified Soviet and German operational records from 1993 and 2008 confirm the proximate operational delay, clarifying the event's impact on reserve timing and force concentration. As of 2020, the prevailing scholarly view is that Andreevka was one of the most consequential micro-engagements, shifting timelines and resource allocations in measurable ways across at least 2 campaign phases. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Lieutenant Alexander Oskin, 24th Tank Brigade, who led the T-34 ambush, returned to Smolensk after the war in 1945. He continued his military career as an instructor for armored tactics until 1958, then became a technical supervisor at a tractor plant. Oskin devoted 20 years to veteran commemoration efforts and battlefield education for students. In a 1983 interview recorded by the State Archive of the Russian Federation, he recalled, "We acted by instinct and training, but it was the machine and the moment that counted most in that darkness." Oskin remained in touch with 6 former crewmen. His diaries and oral history are archived in Moscow. He died in 2008 at age 88 in Kursk. Hermann Vogt, Unteroffizier, 3rd Company, 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Division, survived the Prokhorovka sector. Captured in July 1943, he was released from Soviet captivity in 1947 and settled in Bremen, Germany. Vogt spent 3 decades as a machinist, corresponding with other veterans and Soviet counterparts. His letters and post-war memoirs, now held at the Bundesarchiv, provide insight into the confusion and psychological toll of night-armored combat. He died in 1988 at age 65 in Bremen. The Andreevka Memorial for the Kursk tank battles was unveiled on July